The Senate Banking Committee hearing room fell dead silent as Tim Scott leaned into his microphone, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. Representative Crockett, you talk about helping communities. But what have you actually done besides making noise on social media? The attack was swift, calculated, and designed to embarrass the Texas Democrat in front of millions watching C-SPAN. Scott had positioned himself as a seasoned, accomplished politician, someone with years of experience and a reputation for reasoned, conservative views on black politics. And now here was a freshman representative, Jasmine Crockett, who dared challenge him, but what happened next would shock everyone in that room. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't look down. Instead, she smiled, the kind of smile that makes opponents nervous, because what Tim Scott didn't know was that Crockett had been waiting for this exact moment. She had receipts. She had facts, and she was about to deliver a response that would leave the South Carolina senator completely speechless and trending on every social media platform within minutes. This wasn't just another political disagreement. This was about to become an epic takedown, a moment that would define both of their careers and show America exactly what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these amazing political moments. Seriously, you won't want to miss what happens next because this is about to get absolutely wild. Now, let's see how Jasmine Crockett turned the tables on Tim Scott in the most spectacular way possible. Setting the stage was set for what would become one of the most talked-about exchanges in recent political history. Senator Tim Scott, sitting confidently behind his nameplate, thought he had found an easy target in the first term, representative from Texas. But he was about to learn that underestimating Jasmine Crockett was the biggest mistake of his political career. The irony was thick in the air. Here was Scott, a man who had spent years positioning himself as the reasonable voice of conservative black politics, about to get schooled by a woman who had spent her life fighting in the trenches for justice. The contrast couldn't have been more perfect. The establishment politician versus the street-smart attorney. The careful moderate versus the unapologetic progressive. The senator who played it safe versus the representative who came to fight. The hearing had been routine until that moment. Discussions about banking regulations, committee business, the usual Washington back and forth. But tension had been building between Scott and Crockett for weeks over their different approaches to economic policy affecting black communities. Scott, as the highest-ranking black Republican in the Senate, often clashed with progressive Democrats like Crockett over solutions to systemic issues. The backstory made this confrontation even more explosive. Just 2 weeks earlier, Crockett had called out Scott's voting record during a CNN interview, noting that he had voted against every major piece of legislation that would have directly helped black families. Scott's team had been furious, issuing press releases and demanding retractions. But Crockett had doubled down, providing receipts for every claim she made. The tension had been simmering ever since, with both sides waiting for the right moment to settle the score. What made this confrontation so explosive was that it came completely out of nowhere. Crockett had been quietly taking notes, listening to testimony when Scott decided to make her his target. The cameras were rolling, C-SPAN was broadcasting live, and social media was about to explode, introducing the players to understand why this moment was so significant. You need to know exactly who these two political figures are and what they represent in American politics today. Tim Scott had been riding high in Republican circles. As the only black Republican senator, he carried enormous weight in the party. Born in North Charleston, South Carolina, Scott had built his career on a message of conservative values and personal responsibility. He'd served in the House before moving to the Senate in 2013, and had even made a brief run for president in 2024 before dropping out. Scott's political brand was built on being the reasonable conservative voice, someone who could speak to issues affecting black Americans while maintaining strict Republican principles. He was polished, experienced, and used to being the only black face in Republican leadership meetings. His supporters saw him as proof that the Republican Party was inclusive and forward-thinking, but critics argued that Scott often served as political cover for policies that hurt the very communities he claimed to represent. They said he was more interested in appealing to white conservative voters than actually fighting for Black Americans. This tension had been building for months as Scott positioned himself as a countervoice to progressive Democrats. The truth was, Scott had become comfortable in his role as the GOP's go-to Black voice. He'd grown used to respect from colleagues, respect from conservative media, and the assumption that his perspective would go unchallenged. He'd participated in countless debates where his identity gave him automatic credibility on racial issues, regardless of his actual positions. This comfort had made him overconfident, perhaps even arrogant about his ability to handle any challenger who might question his approach. On the other side sat Jasmine Crockett, and she represented everything that made establishment politicians nervous. A former criminal defense attorney from Dallas, Crockett had been elected to Congress in 2022 as part of a new wave of young progressive Democrats who weren't interested in playing by the old rules. At just 42 years old, Crockett had already made a name for herself as someone who didn't back down from fights. She'd gone viral multiple times for her sharp questioning during committee hearings and her ability to break down complex issues in ways that regular people could understand. Her background as a defense attorney had taught her how to think quickly under pressure and how to dismantle weak arguments piece by piece. Crockett represented a district that was majority Black and Hispanic, and she had won her seat by promising to be an unapologetic advocate for working families. She wasn't interested in compromise for the sake of compromise, and she especially wasn't interested in being lectured by Republicans about what was best for her community. What made her particularly dangerous to opponents was her combination of legal training, social media savvy, and genuine connection to the people she represented. Unlike many politicians who seemed disconnected from real struggles, Crockett had grown up in South Dallas and understood poverty, discrimination, and the challenges facing working families firsthand. Crockett had a reputation for doing her homework. Her staff was known for preparing extensive briefing books for every hearing, every meeting, every appearance. She understood that as a Black woman in Congress, she would be held to a higher standard than her colleagues, so she made sure she was always the most prepared person in the room. This wasn't just professional pride. It was survival strategy in an institution that was still dominated by white men who were often looking for reasons to dismiss her. The moment of attack, this confrontation represented much more than two politicians disagreeing. It was about competing visions for how Black Americans should engage with the political system. Scott represented the conservative approach. Work within existing systems. Focus on personal responsibility. Don't rock the boat too much. Crockett represented the progressive approach. Challenge the system directly. Demand structural changes and never apologize for fighting hard. The hearing room was packed with staffers, lobbyists, and reporters who sensed that something big was about to happen. Social media was already buzzing with anticipation as clips from earlier in the hearing showed tension building between the two. For Scott, this was supposed to be an easy win. Attack the freshman Democrat, show his conservative credentials, maybe get some clips that would play well with his base. He had the advantage of experience, seniority, and the respect that comes with being a senator. For Crockett, this was about proving that the new generation of Democrats wouldn't be intimidated by Republican attacks. She'd been dealing with condescending attitudes from male colleagues since arriving in Congress, and she was tired of being underestimated. The attack. Scott takes his shot. The attack came during what should have been a routine discussion about community development financial institutions. Scott had been questioning witnesses about the effectiveness of various federal programs when he suddenly shifted his focus to Crockett, who was sitting just a few seats away from him on the committee. "You know what, Representative Crockett?" Scott said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that immediately put everyone on edge. "I've been listening to you talk about helping communities for months now, but I have to ask, what have you actually accomplished besides making noise on social media?" The question hit like a thunderbolt. Committee hearings rarely featured this kind of direct confrontation between members, especially across party lines. Staffers looked up from their phones. Reporters started typing frantically. The C-SPAN cameras caught every reaction in the room. Scott wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who thought he'd just delivered a devastating blow. I mean, I've been in Congress for over a decade. I've passed real legislation that has helped real people, but all I see from you is tweets and TikToks and viral moments. Where's the substance? The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just political disagreement. This was one colleague publicly questioning another's competence and seriousness. In the polite world of congressional committees, this was the equivalent of throwing a punch. Scott's tone carried all the dismissive energy of someone who believed his years in Washington automatically made him superior to the social media politicians sitting across from him. What Scott didn't realize was that he was falling into a trap that had caught many politicians before him. Assuming that social media engagement meant lack of substance, he was about to learn that Crockett's online presence wasn't a substitute for real work. It was an amplifier for it. Crockett's response, the takedown Crockett's face remained perfectly calm, but anyone watching closely could see her jaw tighten slightly. She set down her pen deliberately and looked directly at Scott. The room fell completely silent, waiting for her response. But Scott wasn't done escalating. Apparently emboldened by what he saw as Crockett's silence, he decided to twist the knife deeper. "Senator Scott," interrupted the committee chairman, trying to restore order, but Scott waved him off. "No. I think this is important," Scott continued. "We have serious work to do here, and I'm tired of grandstanding. Representative Crockett, you represent a district with real problems. Poverty, crime, education, challenges. Your constituents deserve better than someone who's more interested in going viral than doing the hard work of governance." Now he had crossed a line that veteran politicians knew better than to cross. Questioning someone's competence was one thing, but suggesting they didn't care about their own constituents was a direct attack on their character and fitness for office. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Republican staffers were frantically texting, sensing that their boss might have overplayed his hand. Democratic staffers were equally busy, some looking worried about how their member would respond to such a public attack. The viral moment, the immediate aftermath of Jasmine Crockett's takedown of Tim Scott, was unlike anything Washington had seen in years. Within minutes of the exchange, social media exploded with a force that surprised even seasoned political observers. The hashtag #NotYourCrockett was trending on Twitter within 15 minutes. The original C-SPAN clip was shared thousands of times in the first hour, with political commentators, activists, and regular citizens all weighing in on what they had just witnessed. Jasmine Crockett's rise. The aftermath for Jasmine Crockett. The exchange was a career-defining moment that established her as a major figure in Democratic politics. Her office reported that they received over 10,000 supportive emails in the 24 hours after the exchange, including dozens from fellow members of Congress. Conclusion: the future of politics. This story represents a turning point in American politics, a defining moment when preparation and authenticity prevailed over traditional seniority and political gamesmanship. Jasmine Crockett's ability to dismantle Tim Scott with facts, preparation, and righteous indignation redefined the way political battles can be fought in the social media age. In politics, when you come for someone, make sure you've done your homework first. Because if you haven't, you might just get the education of a lifetime. On live television,